Welcome to today's lesson. Today we're diving into something that's not only crucial for your own research projects, but also central to the evolution of social science itself, research gaps. So what do we mean by a research gap? A research gap is essentially an unanswered question or an unexplored area within a given field of study. Think of it as a blind spot. No matter how much research has been done in a certain area, there are always little pockets of missing information, contradictory findings, or even outdated perspectives. Finding these gaps is like discovering new opportunities to contribute something meaningful to the field. Let's break this down further. Why do research gaps matter? First and foremost, they drive innovation. Social sciences, like any field, thrive when we question the status quo. Research gaps allow us to challenge existing theories or explore new dimensions that haven't been fully understood yet. For example, say there's a ton of research on the effects of social media on teenagers' mental health, but very little that explores the same issue in senior citizens. That's a gap. Addressing this gap would give us fresh perspectives and could potentially lead to significant findings that shape policy, programs, or even how we use social media as a society. But how do you find these gaps? Good question. One approach is to look at existing literature. When you read papers, ask yourself, what are the limitations or open-ended questions these studies leave behind? Sometimes authors will point out gaps themselves in their limitations section. If they say something like, this study only focuses on a small population, or more research is needed on this subject, that's your cue. Another way is to focus on conflicting results in past studies. If two or more studies show different conclusions about the same phenomenon, there's likely a gap in how we fully understand the topic. That could be your next area of focus. Now, once you've identified a research gap, your role is to decide how you can address it. This doesn't always mean starting from scratch. Sometimes it's about using new methodologies, looking at data in a new way, or applying existing theories to new contexts. To wrap up, research gaps are essential for advancing knowledge in social science. They help us avoid reinventing the wheel and instead push the boundaries of what we know. They give your research a purpose and direction and contribute to the larger body of work in your field. Let's continue our discussion on research gaps. Now, we've talked about what research gaps are and why they matter, but how do you actually go about identifying them? Well, there are a few strategies, and I'll cover three of the most effective ones. First, we have the observed reality versus ideal state approach. Think of this as looking at the difference between what is happening in the real world and what should be happening ideally. For instance, let's say you're studying social policies aimed at reducing poverty. There might be a big difference between the current outcomes of these policies, the reality, and the desired results, the ideal state. If the reality doesn't match up to the ideal, that's a research gap worth exploring. Why aren't these policies working as expected? What factors are being overlooked? Next up is the issue of insufficient knowledge. This is pretty straightforward. Are there areas where we just don't know enough? Sometimes the literature in a field is robust in some areas, but sparse in others. For example, there might be extensive research on economic inequality in urban areas, but very little on rural regions. That's an area of insufficient knowledge that could be a great opportunity for new research. This type of gap usually becomes apparent when you do a thorough literature review and notice these glaring holes in the data. Finally, we have the PICOS framework, which is a systematic way to identify research gaps. PICOS stands for population, intervention, comparison, outcomes, and setting. This framework helps you break down studies by asking specific questions about each of these elements. Let's say you're reviewing studies on educational interventions. You might find that there's a lot of research on urban schools, the setting part, but very little on rural schools. Or perhaps there's a focus on short-term interventions, but no studies looking at long-term outcomes. Using PICOS helps you pinpoint exactly where these gaps are and how to address them. In summary, identifying research gaps involves looking at what we observe versus what we ideally expect, finding areas where we lack sufficient knowledge, and systematically breaking down research using frameworks like PICOS. By applying these strategies, you can find gaps that not only advance your own research, but also contribute something meaningful to the broader field. All right, let's take a closer look at why identifying research gaps is so critical to the research process, particularly in the social sciences. Identifying gaps doesn't just help you find a topic. It provides direction for meaningful contributions to your field. First off, let's talk about relevance. Gaps. You ensure that your research is addressing unmet needs. In other words, you're filling in those blind spots that are missing in the current body of knowledge. This is crucial because research is ultimately about solving problems and advancing our understanding. If you identify a gap that's relevant to society or your field, which can have immediate and impactful benefits, it's not just about finding any gap, it's about finding the right gap. Next, we have innovation. Gaps guide researchers toward contributing new insights, which is the key to innovation in the social sciences. By exploring areas that haven't been thoroughly examined, or by challenging assumptions, your research can lead to new perspectives and even challenge the way we think about certain issues. For example, a gap might exist in how we understand the effects of technology on rural communities, whereas most studies have focused on urban areas. Addressing that gap could lead to insights that are tailored for those communities. Finally, let's talk about practical impact. Understanding gaps doesn't just advance theoretical knowledge, it also helps create practical solutions. When you identify a gap, especially in applied fields, you're in a position to suggest real-world changes or improvements. For instance, understanding how policies affect marginalized groups could lead to policy reforms. In this sense, identifying gaps makes your research not just an academic exercise, but something that could affect real change. In summary, identifying research gaps is crucial because it ensures your work is relevant, innovative. It allows you to contribute something meaningful, whether to academic theory, societal understanding, or practical applications. As you move on to your own projects, keep these points in mind. They'll help you stay focused on producing work that truly adds value to you. Let's reflect on the three main methodological approaches used in social science research: qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. Understanding these will help you determine which approach best fits the research questions you want to explore. Let's start with qualitative research. This approach is often used when phenomena or trying to gain an in-depth understanding of a complex social issue. It's not about numbers or measurements. It's about context, experiences, and meaning. For example, if you wanted to understand how a community feels about climate change, you might conduct interviews or focus on other people's stories and perspectives. Qualitative methods allow you to dig deep into human behavior and the why behind it. It's exploratory and often used in areas where little previous research exists, or where the research needs to focus on subjective experiences. Now let's move on to quantitative research, opposite side of the spectrum. Quantitative research is all about numbers. It involves measuring variables and testing hypotheses. For instance, if you wanted to test whether social media usage is related to anxiety levels in teenagers, you might use a survey to gather data and then use statistical analysis to relation between the two variables. Quantitative research is structured and seeks to provide answers to how much or how many questions. It's great when you want generalizable results based on data from a large population. Finally, we have mixed methods. This approach combines both qualitative and quantitative methods to provide a more comprehensive understanding of a research problem. For instance, if you were studying the effects of remote work on employee productivity, you might use quantitative data, like productivity metrics, to measure the effect. At the same time, you could use qualitative interviews to understand how employees feel about the work. Mixed methods allow you to get both the breadth and depth of understanding, making your findings more robust and multidimensional. So, to wrap up, qualitative methods give you depth and understanding. Quantitative methods provide measurable and generalizable. Mixed methods allow you to take advantage of both. Choosing the right approach depends on your research question and the kind of insights you're looking for. How do we align our methodology with the research gaps we identify? It's not enough to just find a gap in the literature. You also need to choose the right research method to address that gap effectively. This process can be broken down into 3 key steps: identifying the gap, choosing the method, and addressing. First, you need to identify the gap. This involves recognizing the specific area of insufficient knowledge in your field. You might find, for example, that there's not enough research on how online learning affects students in rural areas. This is your starting point, understanding exactly what knowledge is missing or what question remains. This identification often comes from reviewing literature, reading existing studies, and noticing where the knowledge falls short. Next comes choosing the method. Once you've identified the gap, you need to select a methodology that aligns with the nature of that gap. If your gap involves understanding human experiences, such as how rural students feel about online learning, qualitative methods like interviews or focus groups might be best. But if the gap is about measuring the impact of online learning on student performance, a quantitative approach like surveys and statistical analysis would be more appropriate. It requires both understanding experiences and measuring impact. A mixed methods approach could provide comprehensive insights. Finally, you need to address the gap. This means applying the chosen method effectively to bridge the knowledge gap. For example, if you chose a qualitative method to explore rural students' experiences, you might interviews and analyze their responses to gain new insights. If you're using a quantitative method, you might collect survey data from a large number of students and analyze it statistically to draw conclusions about performance differences. Either way, the goal is to use the right tools to produce meaning that address the research gap you identified. In summary, aligning your methodology with research gaps is a critical part of the research process. It ensures that your approach is suited to the questions you're asking, and that your findings will contribute valuable new knowledge to the field. As in our research journey, always remember to carefully match the method to the gap to ensure your research is both relevant and impactful. Now that we've talked about identifying research gaps and aligning them with the right methodologies, let's dive into different types of research designs. Choosing the right research design is essential because it guides how you collect, analyze, and interpret data based on the kind of gap you're addressing. On 3 common types: exploratory, explanatory, and descriptive research designs. First, let's talk about exploratory research. This design is typically used when there's little to no prior knowledge about a topic or phenomenon. If you've identified a gap where very little research has been done, this is huge. It helps you investigate the unknown and often leads to the formulation of new hypotheses. For example, if you're studying the impact of a newly emerging technology on rural communities, exploratory research could involve interviews or small case studies to gather initial insights. It's about uncovering new ideas for future research, rather than testing pre-existing theories. Next, we have explanatory research. This design is all about understanding the relationships between variables. If you've identified a gap that involves not just describing a phenomenon, but explaining why it happens or how it's connected to other factors, explanatory design is what you need. For instance, if you want to study how social media usage impacts mental health, you'd likely use an explanatory approach to test the relationship between those 2 variables. This type of research often involves hypothesis testing and statistical analysis to confirm or disprove between variables. Finally, there's descriptive research. As the name suggests, this design focuses on providing a detailed account of a phenomenon or group. If your research gap involves a lack of detailed data on a specific population or event, descriptive research will help you fill that gap. This is for when you want to paint a clear picture of the what, but not necessarily the why. For example, a descriptive study might catalog the types of jobs that remote workers engage in, providing a comprehensive overview without necessarily exploring why those workers chose those jobs. In summary, exploratory research is used for unknown areas where you need to gather initial insights. Explanatory research focuses on understanding relationships between variables, and descriptive research aims to provide a detailed picture of a specific phenomenon. Research design you choose should be driven by the nature of the research gap you've identified and the questions you want to answer. One of the most important factors to consider when designing any research study is contextual relevance. This means ensuring that your research is tailored to the specific characteristics of the context in which you're studying. Let's break this down into three key areas: population specificity, fitness, and setting considerations. First, let's talk about population specificity. Every population you study will have its own unique characteristics, whether demographic, cultural, or behavioral. It's important to recognize these unique factors because they directly influence how your research is conducted. You can draw, for example, if you're studying the effects of a public health intervention in a rural area, the population's access to healthcare might be very different from that of an urban area. Failing to consider these differences could lead to inaccurate or irrelevant findings. Always tailor your research design to the specific. Next is intervention appropriateness. When conducting research that involves interventions, whether it's an educational program, a health initiative, or a new policy, you need to ensure that the intervention is suitable for the population and context you're studying. What works in one setting might not work in another. For example, an intervention designed to improve reading skills in elementary school students in a wealthy urban area might not be appropriate for a rural community with different resources or educational needs. The intervention should be designed or adapted to fit the context to be effective. Finally, we have setting considerations, where the research takes place plays a crucial role in shaping the outcomes. This includes factors such as geographic location, socioeconomic conditions, and cultural norms. For instance, a study conducted in a workplace setting may have different dynamics compared to one conducted in a school, or accounting for the specific setting helps ensure that the research findings are applicable and meaningful to that particular environment. In conclusion, contextual relevance is all about making sure that your research is aligned with the specific population, interventions, and setting you're working with. It ensures that you're not only accurate, but also meaningful and applicable in the real world. By paying close attention to these factors, your research will be more likely to contribute valuable insights to your field and make a real-world impact. One of the most important goals in research is to ensure that your work has practical relevance, that it contributes not only to academic theory, but also to real-world solutions. Let's look at three key ways you can make your research more practically relevant. Through targeted research and interdisciplinary and stakeholder engagement. First, targeted research. To ensure your research has real-world impact, focus on gaps that address pressing social issues. This is what we call targeted research. You want to look for areas where your findings can contribute to solving problems that people or communities are currently facing. Further than studying broad or abstract concepts, try focusing on specific challenges like reducing inequality in access to education or improving public health outcomes in underrepresented populations. By targeting your research in this way, you ensure that the results can be applied to actual society. Next, consider taking an interdisciplinary approach. Many of the most pressing social issues we face today are complex and can't be solved by one field alone. Combining insights from various disciplines allows you to tackle problems from multiple angles. For example, a study on climate change can benefit from the perspective of science, economics, sociology, and public policy. When you incorporate different fields, you can develop more comprehensive solutions that address the problem more effectively. This interdisciplinary approach often leads to more innovative and far-reaching results. Finally, don't forget about stakeholder engagement. This means involving the people who are directly impacted by the research or who will use the research outcomes. Stakeholders can include policymakers, community members, industry leaders, or even the population you are studying. Engaging with stakeholders early in the process helps ensure that your research is applicable and grounded in real-world needs. For example, if you're studying the effects of a new policy on rural healthcare, you might want to involve local healthcare workers and policymakers in your research design to ensure it addresses their specific concerns. To wrap up, ensuring practical relevance in research comes down to three things: focusing on real-world issues, using an interdisciplinary approach to address complex problems, and engaging with stakeholders to ensure your findings are applicable and useful. By doing this, your research will not only contribute to academic knowledge, but also make a tangible impact on the communities and issues that matter. In any field, advancing academic knowledge is a fundamental goal of research. But how do we systematically move knowledge forward? Let's break it down into four key steps: literature review, research design, data collection, and analysis and interpretation. First, we start with the literature review, identify the existing knowledge and the gaps in the field. A comprehensive literature review allows you to see what's already been done and, more importantly, what's missing. For example, if you're studying the effects of remote work on productivity, your literature review might reveal that while there's plenty of research on large corporations, little on small businesses, that gap becomes your opportunity to contribute something new to the field. Next comes research design. Once you've identified the gap, you need to develop a methodology that addresses it. This involves choosing the right approach, whether qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods, and designing a study that can answer questions effectively. The design stage is critical because it shapes how you will collect and analyze your data. For example, if the gap you're addressing is about small business productivity, you might decide that a mixed methods approach, combining surveys with in-depth interviews, would provide the most comprehensive insight. As we move to data collection, this is where you gather relevant information to fill the knowledge gap you've identified. Your data could come from surveys, interviews, experiments, or secondary sources, depending on your research design. The goal is to collect high-quality data that will allow you to draw meaningful conclusions. In our case of studying remote work and small businesses, this could mean gathering survey responses from small business owners and conducting follow-up interviews to understand their challenges in greater depth. Finally, we have analysis and interpretation. This is where the magic happens. You draw insights from your data to contribute to the field. You'll analyze your findings, looking for patterns, relationships, and insights that help explain your research question. In our example, your analysis might reveal that small businesses with flexible work arrangements see a boost in productivity, but only if they also implement strong communication tools, push the boundaries of what we know, and provide actionable recommendations for others in the field. To summarize, advancing academic knowledge involves a systematic process: identifying gaps through a literature review, designing a solid research methodology, collecting relevant data, and finalizing that data to contribute new insights. Each step builds on the previous one, and together they ensure that your research adds value to your field and helps move knowledge forward. One of the most powerful outcomes of research is its ability to address real-world social issues. By identifying and filling research gaps, we can contribute to three key areas: policy implications, social interventions, and public awareness. First, let's talk about policy implications. Research plays a critical role in based policymaking. When gaps in knowledge are identified and filled, policymakers can rely on data to craft policies that address the needs of the population more effectively. For example, research that uncovers gaps in healthcare access for marginalized communities can lead to new health policies aimed at increasing accessibility. The more precise and comprehensive the research, the better it can serve as a foundation for policies that are grounded in real data and aimed at solving pressing issues. Next, social interventions. Addressing research gaps doesn't just help inform policy, it also helps improve the effective programs. By understanding the gaps in current social services, we can design more targeted interventions. For instance, if research shows that existing educational programs are failing to reach students in rural areas, that gap can be addressed by developing specialized outreach strategies. The more we know about we can design interventions that truly meet the needs of those affected. Finally, public awareness. Filling research gaps isn't only about informing policymakers and improving social programs. It also plays a crucial role in shaping public understanding. When research uncovers important findings about social, it helps raise awareness among the general public. For example, research on climate change, income inequality, or mental health can bring these issues to the forefront of public discourse, encouraging people to engage with and act on these matters. Improved public awareness can lead to societal shifts, pressure on policymakers to take action. In conclusion, addressing social issues through research means making informed contributions to policy, improving the effectiveness of social interventions, and raising public awareness. By filling gaps in knowledge, researchers have the power to drive meaningful change in the. Whenever we conduct research, particularly in the social sciences, ethical considerations must always be at the forefront. It's not just about collecting data or analyzing results. It's about conducting research in a way that respects the rights and well-being of all involved. Today, we'll focus on three key issues: participant protection, data integrity, and societal impact. First and foremost is participant protection. The well-being of your study participants should always be the highest priority. This means that your research methods must ensure participants are not exposed to unnecessary risk, harm, or discomfort. Informed consent is a critical aspect of this, where participants must fully understand what the research involves and voluntarily agree to take part. Additionally, confidentiality and privacy should be safeguarded. Whether you're conducting interviews, surveys, or experiments, always ensure that your research does and that participants' rights are protected at every stage. Next, let's talk about data integrity. As researchers, we are responsible for maintaining honesty and transparency in how we collect, handle, and analyze data. This means avoiding any form of manipulation, falsification, or selective reporting. Data integrity is essential for the credibility of your research and for advancing knowledge in a meaningful way. Transparency also includes being clear about your methods and potential limitations. Being upfront about any issues in your data collection process or biases in your research design ensures that your work is trustworthy by others. Finally, we must consider the societal impact of our research. While research often seeks to fill knowledge gaps, it's important to consider how your findings might impact society. Could your research potentially reinforce harmful stereotypes? Will it lead to policies that benefit certain groups? Ethical research means thinking through the broader consequences of your work and striving to ensure that your research contributes positively to society. Ideally, your work should not only avoid harm, but also promote social good and equality. In summary, ethical research isn't following rules. It's about protecting participants, ensuring integrity in how data is handled, and considering the broader societal implications of your work. By adhering to these principles, your research can make a meaningful and responsible contribution to both academic knowledge and the world. As we look toward the future of social science research, it's clear that the landscape is rapidly evolving. To continue addressing complex societal challenges, researchers will need to embrace three key future directions: emerging technologies, global collaboration, and continuous learning. Let's talk about emerging technologies. The rapid development of new technologies offers exciting tools for addressing complex social science gaps. From AI and machine learning to big data analytics and virtual reality, these technologies are revolutionizing how we gather and analyze data. For example, machine learning detects patterns in vast datasets, allowing for more accurate predictions and insights. As we move forward, incorporating these technologies will be crucial for handling the increasingly complex and large-scale issues that social science must address. Think about how we can use tools like social media data to study human behavior. AI can assist in evaluating policy impacts in real time. Next, global collaboration. Many of the social issues we face today, such as climate change, migration, and inequality, are not confined to national borders. To tackle these widespread challenges, we need to foster international partnerships and work across disciplines. Collaborating with researchers, institutions, and organizations from different countries allows for a more diverse perspective and a holistic approach to problem solving. International collaboration can also help share best practices and resources. ensuring that research conducted in one part of the world can inform. We are in an era where global cooperation is essential to understanding and resolving complex social issues. Finally, continuous learning is key. Social science research methods need to be adaptable, evolving with the changing social landscapes and challenges. As societies change due to technological, political shifts, researchers must stay informed and adjust their methods to keep pace. This could mean learning new data collection techniques, staying up to date with emerging ethical considerations, or adapting methodologies to better understand new social phenomena. Continuous learning ensures relevant and capable of addressing the pressing issues of the day. In summary, the future of social science research will be shaped by the integration of new technologies, a commitment to global collaboration, and a focus on continuous learning. By embracing these future directions, research of evolving challenges and contribute meaningful solutions to global social issues.